Picture yourself standing at the very edge of existence where the maps of our ancestors once warned of dragons and unseen forces. Before you rises an impossible rampart white, a frozen fortress stretching beyond the horizon, like a barrier built to defy human curiosity. This is the ice wall of Antarctica, a jagged frontier that has guarded forbidden truths for millennia. Tonight, I am your guide into a realm where official history begins to blur like fresh snow, and where the ice itself seems to whisper things that should not exist. Why does this desolate continent require international permission to visit? Why do the most powerful leaders of the world travel to this white void only to return with silence that feels like a heavy secret? Close your eyes and let your mind drift into the mystery of the wall, where reality becomes stranger than fiction. Picture the sheer scale of what we are discussing. A vertical cliff of ice rising out of the slate-gray ocean. A wall that does not end where the horizon says it should. This is not a simple shoreline of sand and rock. This is the Great Ice Barrier, a frozen rampart that has stood as a silent sentinel at the bottom of our world for longer than human memory has existed. To understand the secrets of Antarctica, we must first look at the foundation of the mystery. We must look at the wall itself, the very edge where our maps stop and the unknown begins. It is a place where the water is so cold it turns the color of obsidian, and the air is so thin it feels like breathing glass. For centuries, the world was content to believe that the southern reaches of the earth were a void, a place of nothingness. But then came the year 1773. Captain James Cook, one of the most celebrated navigators in history, sailed his ship, the Resolution, further south than any man had ever dared. He was searching for a southern continent, a land of gold and green. What he found instead was a wall. He described it as an immense bank of ice, rising like a cathedral of frost. He sailed for miles along its edge, but he could find no opening, no harbor, no way through in his journal. He wrote that no man would ever venture further than he had, and that the lands to the south would forever remain hidden from human eyes. He saw the wall not as a feature of the earth, but as a conclusion to it. But the story did not end with Cook. In 1841, Sir James Clark Ross arrived with his ships, the Erebus and the Terror. He did not find a scattered field of icebergs. He found a solid, continuous face of ice that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was hundreds of feet tall and thousands of miles long. He called it the Great Ice Barrier, a name that suggests a defensive structure rather than a natural formation. As his crew sailed along the base of this frozen cliff, they felt a sense of overwhelming smallness. The ice was so flat on top, so perfectly horizontal, that it appeared artificial. It looked like the foundation of a world that had been built and then abandoned. Think about that for a moment. Why would nature create a barrier so uniform and so vast? Official science tells us that this is merely the Ross Ice Shelf, a floating mass of glacier ice. But the sailors who stood beneath its shadow saw something different. They saw a boundary. They saw a wall that seemed to have a purpose. They reported that in certain lights, the ice did not look like ice at all. It looked like polished stone. It reflected the sky with such clarity that it was impossible to tell where the frozen earth ended and the heavens began. It was a place where gravity seemed to pull differently, where the stars seemed closer, and where the silence was so heavy it felt like a physical weight upon the chest. This is the white silence. It is a phenomenon described by almost every explorer who has ever reached the wall. It is not just the absence of sound. It is a presence. It is the feeling that the continent is listening to you, that every step you take on the snow is being recorded by the ice itself. In this silence, the mind begins to play tricks. Sailors reported hearing voices in the wind, not their own language, but a series of tones and hums that sounded like machinery working deep beneath the frost. They spoke of the ice singing, a low, rhythmic vibration that made the wooden hulls of their ships rattle even when the seas were calm. When we look at the maps from this era, we find curious things. Early cartographers often drew Antarctica as a series of islands, or as a land mass with mountain ranges that should not have been visible under the ice. How did they know what lay beneath a shelf that is miles thick? Some claim they were copying even older maps from a time before the freeze, a time when the ice wall did not exist. This suggests that the barrier is a recent addition to our planet, a structure that was put in place to seal away something that the world was no longer allowed to see. Why is it that even today, with our satellites and our advanced technology, Antarctica remains the most restricted place on Earth? In 1959, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty. Today, over 50 countries have joined it. On the surface, it is an agreement of peace and science. But look closer at the restrictions. It is the only continent where you cannot simply fly a plane where you wish. There are vast no-fly zones, areas of the ice that are blurred in satellite imagery, regions where GPS signals simply vanish. If you try to sail a private vessel to the coast, you will be intercepted. You will be turned back. Officially, this is for your own safety. The environment is too harsh, they say. The rescue costs are too high. But is that the truth? Or is the treaty a global agreement to guard the wall? If the ice wall is just a natural shelf of frozen water, why does it require military oversight? Why do the world's most powerful leaders, from politicians to religious heads, make secret trips to the ice and return with haunted looks in their eyes? They speak of the beauty of the wilderness, but they do not talk about what they saw beyond the restricted zones. They do not talk about the geometric patterns in the ice that look like the rooftops of buried cities. They do not talk about the lights that emerge from the wall and dance across the polar sky without making a sound. There are accounts from pilots who have strayed over the forbidden coordinates. They tell of seeing openings in the ice, vast, perfectly circular holes that lead down into the darkness. They describe seeing green valleys in the middle of the frozen waste, places where the snow melts away to reveal lush vegetation and flowing rivers. They talk about seeing structures made of material that is neither metal nor stone, pulsing with a soft, blue light. When these pilots return, their flight logs are confiscated. They are told they saw a mirage. They are told that the cold and the glare of the sun have affected their minds. But the silence of the wall tells a different story. It is a story of foundation, a barrier that marks the end of our familiar reality. When you stand at the edge of the ice wall, you are standing at the edge of the known world. Beyond it lies a territory that has been erased from our history books, a land that may hold the key to who we are and where we came from. The early explorers felt this in their bones. They felt that they were trespassers in a realm that did not belong to humanity. They saw the ice as a veil, a white curtain drawn across the face of the earth. Imagine the sailors of the mid-19th century. Their wooden ships were dwarfed by the vertical face of the wall. They would sail for days, weeks, months, and the wall would not change. It was a constant, terrifying reminder that they were not in control. They described the ice as having a personality. Sometimes it was welcoming, glowing with a soft gold in the midnight sun. Other times, it was hostile. The air would turn a deep, bruising purple, and the ice would turn a jagged, obsidian black. In those moments, the explorers felt that the wall was watching them, that it was waiting for them to leave. This is why we call it the White Silence, because the secrets of the wall are not shouted. They are whispered. They are hidden in the way the shadows fall across the crevasses. They are buried in the core samples that scientists bring up from miles below the surface. Samples that sometimes contain air from a time when the Earth was a different place, when the stars in the sky were different, when the humans who walked the Earth were not like us. Some believe the wall is not ice at all, but a massive energy field that has frozen the moisture in the air around it. They say that if you could turn off the field, the wall would vanish, and the true Antarctica would be revealed, a continent of ancient wonders and forbidden technology. Others say the wall is a prison, a structure built to keep something contained, something that was defeated in an ancient war and buried beneath the frost. They point to the rhythmic pulsing heard by seismic sensors as the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. As we move forward into the history of this frozen enigma, we must remember that the wall is the first layer of the secret. It is the foundation. It is the great barrier that asks us one simple question. Are you brave enough to look at what lies beyond the white? Or will you be content to stay in the safety of the world we have been given? The story of Antarctica is not just a story of exploration. It is a story of the limits of human knowledge. It is the story of the foundations of the world. The wall remains there, even now, silent, impossibly vast, guarded by treaties and technology. But for those who know how to listen, the white silence is not empty. It is a conversation between the past and the future. It is the ice wall of Antarctica whispering its forbidden truths to anyone who has the courage to stand at the edge and wonder why. The foundations are set, the barrier is high, and the secrets of the great silence are waiting to be told. We have only just begun to scratch the surface of the frost. The ice wall is not the end. It is only the beginning of a journey into a place that was never meant to be found. Think of the men who first stood there, their breath fogging in the frigid air as they looked up at a structure that defied all logic. They were the first to understand that the world is much larger than the map suggests. They were the first to feel the weight of the white silence. And as we follow in their footsteps, as we look at the blurred images and the missing records, we begin to feel it too. The sense that we are close to a truth that could change everything. The foundation of the Great Barrier is not just ice. It is a secret that has been kept for 1,000,000 years. And tonight, we are going to walk right up to the edge of that secret and look in the eye. This is the white silence. This is the foundation of the Great Barrier. And the truth is waiting just beyond the frost. Long before the first modern explorer set foot on the Antarctic ice, before the great ships of the 19th century were even a dream in the minds of shipbuilders, there was a map, a fragment of gazelle skin parchment, dusty and forgotten, that would eventually challenge every single thing we thought we knew about the timeline of human civilization. This is not a ghost story or a sailor's tall tale. This is a matter of ink and geography. A mystery that was discovered in 1929, tucked away in the library of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. It was drawn by a man named Piri Reis, a famous Ottoman admiral and cartographer who lived in the 16th century. At first glance, it looks like a beautiful artifact of its time, filled with colorful depictions of the Atlantic Ocean and the surrounding lands. But if you look closer, at the very bottom of the parchment, you will see something that should not exist. You will see a coastline that matches the northern shores of Antarctica with a precision that defies the technology of 1513. How is it possible that a map created more than 300 years before the discovery of the continent shows its frozen shores? And why does it show them without their ice? Close your eyes and let the weight of that question sink in. We are taught that Antarctica has been a frozen wasteland for millions of years. We are taught that no human eye saw its mountains until 1820. Yet here, on a map compiled from ancient sources, we find a coastline that matches the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land. It shows rivers where there is now only ice. It shows mountain ranges that remained hidden beneath 2 miles of frozen water until modern seismic sounding technology revealed them in the middle of the 20th century. This is the Pyre Reef's enigma, an ancient echo of a past that we are not permitted to remember, a whisper on parchment that tells us history is not a straight line, but a series of circles, some of which have been erased by time and cataclysm. Tonight, we follow the ink. We go back to the moment this map was discovered and the shock waves it sent through the scientific community. When Professor Charles Hapgood brought this map to the attention of the United States Air Force in 1960, he was met with a chilling confirmation. Colonel Harold Ohlmeyer, the commander of the 8th Reconnaissance Technical Squadron, wrote back with a statement that still haunts researchers today. He confirmed that the geographical details shown in the lower part of the map fits the results of the seismic profile made by the Norwegian-British Antarctic expedition of 1949. The coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap. He added that the ice cap in this region is now about a mile thick. Let that number settle in your mind. A mile of ice. How did a 16th century admiral, sitting in the warm Mediterranean, possess knowledge of a land buried under a mile of frozen water? Pyre Reese himself was honest about his work. He did not claim to have sailed to the southern pole. In his own notes, written on the map itself, he explains that he was not the original author of these details. He tells us that he compiled his map from 20 older source maps. Some of these, he claimed, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. Others, he whispered, were even older than that. He was a collector of ancient secrets, a man who had access to the legendary archives of the East. Perhaps even fragments of knowledge saved from the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Think about what that implies. It suggests that there was once a global civilization, a seafaring culture with the technology to map the entire world with mathematical precision, long before the rise of the Greeks or the Egyptians. A civilization that saw the world when the ice wall was not a wall at all, but a green and living coast. If we accept the Pyre Reese map as authentic, we must accept that our entire timeline of human progress is a fiction. We must admit that we are a species with amnesia, walking over the ruins of a precursor world that we have forgotten how to read. But the Pyre Reese map is not alone. As we dig deeper into the archives of forbidden history, we find other maps that echo this impossible knowledge. There's the Orontius Phineas map of 1531. It depicts the entire continent of Antarctica with remarkable accuracy, showing mountain ranges, plains, and river systems. Most strikingly, it shows the continent position at the South Pole, but it depicts the center of the landmass as an empty space, while the coasts are free of ice. Modern glaciology tells us that this is exactly how Antarctica would have looked as the ice began to grow, with the interior freezing first and the coastal rivers flowing for thousands of years afterward. Who were the people who stood on those shores and watched the rivers turn to glass? What did they see as the great white wall began to rise and swallow their world? Charles Hapgood, the man who spent his life studying these maps, proposed a theory that was supported by none other than Albert Einstein. It was a theory of crustal displacement. He suggested that the entire outer shell of the Earth could occasionally shift, moving continents from temperate zones into the frigid poles in a matter of weeks or months. If such a shift occurred, a flourishing civilization in Antarctica would have been flash frozen, buried under miles of ice in a geological blink of an eye. Their cities, their monuments, and their history would have been preserved like insects in amber, hidden beneath the very wall of ice we look at today. This is why the ice wall is more than just a barrier of frozen water. It is a lid on a coffin. It is a shroud covering a world that was never meant to be forgotten. When sailors and explorers speak of the wall today, when they tell stories of strange geometric patterns in the ice or metallic objects embedded in the glaciers, they are seeing the remnants of that lost age. They are seeing the ancient echoes that Pyrie Reefs captured on gazelle skin 500 years ago. But here is where the mystery becomes even more unsettling. If this knowledge existed in the ancient world, why was it suppressed? Why were these maps hidden away in private collections and palace libraries? And why, when modern science finally confirmed their accuracy, was the discovery met with such a wall of silence? Perhaps it is because the truth is too disruptive. If we admit that an advanced civilization existed 10,000 years ago, we must ask what happened to them. We must ask if the same cataclysm that buried them could happen to us. And we must ask if the powers of the world today have found something in the ice that they are not ready to share. Some researchers believe that the secret expeditions to Antarctica are not looking for minerals or oil, but for the source of the Pyrie Reefs map. They are looking for the archives of the precursors, the technology of the people who mapped the world before the ice. Every time a satellite image of the Antarctic interior is blurred, every time a new no-fly zone is established over a remote mountain range, we are reminded of the Pyrie Reefs enigma. We are reminded that there is a version of history that is not in our textbooks, a version where the ice wall is the final chapter of a story that began in a world we can no longer imagine. Picture the Ottoman admiral in his study, surrounded by the smell of old parchment and salt air. He is looking at maps that were already thousands of years old when he found them. He sees coastlines he will never visit and mountains he will never climb. He is a guardian of a fragment of the truth, a messenger from a time when the world was wide and the ice had not yet claimed the South. He writes his notes in careful ink, hoping that one day someone will be brave enough to look at the map and see what is really there. Tonight, as the wind howls outside and the world feels small and known, remember the Pyrie Reefs map. Remember that the ice wall holds the memory of a green world. It holds the mountain ranges that match the gazelle skin parchment. And it holds the silence of a civilization that saw the sun set on a world without ice. The map is a key, but the lock is buried deep beneath the frost, guarded by secrets that were never meant to be whispered. But the map was only the beginning. For as we look closer at these ancient charts, we begin to see that the ice wall itself has been changing. It has been moving, breathing, and hiding more than just coastlines. The deeper we go into the mystery of the map, the more we realize that the Admiral was not just showing us where the land was. He was showing us where the secrets began. And those secrets are not just on paper. They are written in the very stones and shadows of the frozen South, waiting for the moment when the ice finally speaks the truth. For every ancient echo has a source, and every map has a destination. And our destination lies beyond the ramparts of the ice, in the heart of the enigma that Pyrie Reefs tried to show us so long ago. The story of the map is a bridge, and as we cross it, we find ourselves standing before the most forbidden truths of all, truths that have been waiting in the cold, silent and patient, for the day when we would finally remember how to look. The story of the ice wall does not begin with modern satellites or classified military drones. It begins in a time of wood and canvas, when men trusted their lives to the strength of oak hulls and the unpredictable mercy of the winds. To understand the mystery of the frozen rampart, we must look back to the early 19th century, an era when the bottom of the world was a blank space on the map that fueled the wildest dreams of explorers and the deepest fears of kings. For hundreds of years, the world believed in a southern landmass, a terra australis incognita that balanced the weight of the northern continents. But when the first brave souls finally reached those frigid latitudes, they did not find a lush garden or a new kingdom to conquer. They found a barrier, a wall of ice so massive and so absolute that it seemed to announce the very end reality. Think about the year 1820. It was a time of intense maritime rivalry. The British, the Russians, and the Americans were all racing toward the unknown, driven by the hope of finding new sealing grounds or perhaps a legendary continent. In January that year, Fabian von Bellingshausen of the Russian Imperial Navy became one of the first humans to ever lay eyes on the Antarctic coastline. But his description was not one of mountains and valleys. He wrote in his logs a continuous sheet of ice, a solid and vertical face that rose from the churning gray waters like a mountain range made of glass. He described it as a solid wall of ice with a flat top stretching as far as his telescopes could see. To Bellingshausen, it was not merely an obstacle. It was a phenomenon that defied the logic of the northern oceans. It was too straight, too uniform, and too imposing to be a simple collection of icebergs. A few days later, Edward Bransfield of the British Royal Navy sighted the same region. He spoke of peaks of ice that looked like cathedral spires, rising out of mist that never seemed to lift. He described the coastline as an impenetrable fortress of white, where the sea crashed against cliffs of ice hundreds of feet tall. And then there was Nathaniel Palmer, an American sealer who approached the same frozen boundary. His accounts were perhaps the most unsettling. Palmer spoke of a barrier that made his ship feel like a tiny toy. He noted that there were no beaches, no harbors, and no way to set foot on the land itself. It was as if the continent was a high plateau, encased in a shell of ice that was designed to keep the rest of the world out. These early accounts share a common thread that is often overlooked in traditional history books. They all describe the ice as something more than a natural formation. They speak of its verticality and its impossible scale. In 1841, Sir James Clark Ross took the exploration of this barrier even further. He commanded the ships Erebus and Terror, vessels that would later become legendary for their tragic disappearance in the Arctic. But in the South, Ross was the first to sail along the edge of what we now call the Ross Ice Shelf. For hundreds of miles, he followed a wall of ice that rose 200 feet above the waterline. He called it the Great Ice Barrier. He wrote that one might as well try to sail through the cliffs of Dover as to attempt a landing on this frozen rampart. Ross noted something that has haunted researchers for generations. He described the wall as perfectly flat on top, like a giant table, and extending in a nearly straight line for hundreds of miles. To the sailors on his deck, it did not look like land at all. It looked like an artificial construction, a wall built by giants to mark the edge of the world. Why did it have no breaks? Why was it so consistent in its height? The crew watched the wall for days, and many began to whisper that they were not looking at a continent, but at the very edge of the earth. In the sailors' taverns of the 19th century, stories began to circulate that the world was not a globe, but a vast plain, and that the Great Ice Barrier was a ring of ice that held the oceans in place. But here's where the historical records take a turn into the shadows. When you dig into the archives of the British Admiralty or the Russian Navy, you find that many of the original logbooks from these expeditions are incomplete. There are accounts of entire pages being cut out with a blade. There are entries where the coordinates are crossed out with heavy ink, making it impossible to know exactly where the ships were or what they were seeing. In the private journals of the officers, which were never intended for public eyes, we find a different story. One lieutenant on Ross's expedition wrote about seeing lights on top of the barrier. He described seeing glowing shapes that move with incredible speed along the crest of the ice wall, even during the darkest parts of the polar night. He wondered if there were inhabitants on top of that frozen plateau, beings who watched the ships from above, silent and unseen. Another midshipman wrote of a strange phenomenon where the compasses would stop working entirely when they approached certain sections of the wall. He claimed that the air itself felt heavy, as if it were charged with electricity. He described hearing sounds that resembled mechanical grinding, echoing out from the deep ice. He asked in his diary why the captain refused to send a landing party to scale the wall, even when they found sections that seemed to have natural ledges. The official answer was always safety and the risk of the ice collapsing, but the sailors felt it was something else. They felt their leaders were afraid of what they might find on top of that white horizon. As we look at these early expeditions, we have to ask a difficult question. What did they find that was so significant it had to be scrubbed from the official narrative? It is a historical fact that after these initial voyages, interest in Antarctica seemed to vanish for decades. Why did the great powers of the world, who were usually so hungry for territory, suddenly stop sending ships to the Southern Ocean? Some believe it was because they realized the ice wall was not just a natural feature, but a boundary that was actively guarded. They realized that beyond that wall lay a truth that would destroy the foundations of the modern world. There are whispers in the historical community of a secret meeting held in London in the late 1800s. It was a gathering of the heads of the most powerful scientific and naval organizations of the time. The topic was the Southern Barrier. Rumor has it that they were presented with evidence from a lost expedition, a ship that had found a way through a hidden opening in the ice wall. The survivors of that voyage supposedly brought back maps of lands that do not appear on any modern globe. They spoke of a sun that never set and of mountains that were not made of ice, but of a dark, metallic stone that hummed with energy. They spoke of a civilization that had watched humanity from across the frozen threshold for thousands of years. According to the legend, the leaders at this meeting realized that the public was not ready for such a discovery. They decided that Antarctica must be presented as a barren, lifeless wasteland. They agreed that any future exploration must be strictly controlled, and that the ice wall must be seen as a natural obstacle rather than a deliberate barrier. This was the beginning of the Great Silence. This was the moment when the secrets of the ice wall were buried under layers of bureaucracy and classification. The early explorers had seen the truth, but their voices were drowned out by a narrative that was carefully crafted to keep us in the dark. Think about the sailors who stood on the decks of those wooden ships, staring up at a wall of ice that seemed to touch the sky. They didn't have the sophisticated sensors we have today, but they had their eyes and their instincts. They knew that nature doesn't usually create straight lines that stretch for 500 miles. They knew that ice doesn't usually hum with a low frequency that makes your teeth ache. They knew that the mist that hangs over the barrier isn't always just frozen water, but sometimes behaves like a living veil, hiding things that move in the shadows. One of the most compelling accounts comes from a French explorer named Jules Dumont d'Urville, who also sailed to the ice wall in the 1830s. He wrote about finding a section of the wall that appeared to be made of different material than the rest. He described it as having a texture like polished marble, reflecting the light of the sun with such intensity that his men had to look away. He wanted to investigate further, but his ship was suddenly pushed back by a current that seemed to emerge out of nowhere, flowing in a direction that contradicted the local tides. It was as if the wall itself was pushing them away, a silent warning that they had reached the end of their permitted journey. These early expeditions were the first time modern humanity truly brushed against the mystery of the ice wall. They were the first to cross the frozen threshold and realize that the world was far larger and more complex than they had been taught. But the doors they opened were quickly slammed shut. The maps were redrawn, the logbooks were edited, and the witnesses were sworn to secrecy. We are left with only the fragment of their experiences, the whispered stories of giants in the snow and cities made of glass. But even these fragments are enough to make us wonder. What is really behind that wall? Is it just a continent of ice? Or is it the gateway to a world that was taken from us? As we move forward in our journey through the mysteries of Antarctica, we will see that the questions raised by Ross, Bellingshausen, and Palmer never really went away. They only became more urgent as our technology improved. The ice wall stands there still, a silent sentinel at the bottom of the world, holding back the weight of the oceans and the weight of history that we are only now beginning to remember. The truth is buried deep, hidden under centuries of snow and a deliberate blanket of silence. But the ice is shifting. The secrets are beginning to leak out, like water from a melting glacier. And soon, the wall itself may finally tell the story of what has been guarding for all these thousands of years. The early explorers were the first to feel the awe and the terror of the frozen rampart. They were the first to realize that the maps were not just incomplete, they were a deception. Tonight, we follow in their wake, looking past the official records and into the heart of the mystery. We look to the wall, and we ask the same question the sailors asked as they huddled on their decks in the freezing night. What are you? Are you a gift of nature, or are you a prison for forgotten truth? The answer lies across that frozen threshold, in a place where the ice meets the infinite, and where the history of our world truly begins. The year was 1946. The world was finally emerging from the long shadow of the Second World War, a time of rebuilding and weary peace. Yet, while the rest of humanity looked toward the future with a mixture of hope and exhaustion, the United States Navy was quietly assembling one of the most massive and mysterious task forces ever to sail the southern seas. This was not a small scientific mission. This was a full-scale military mobilization. They called it Operation High Jump, and its official objective was to establish a research base and test equipment in the most punishing conditions on Earth. But when you look at the sheer scale of the force assembled, the official explanation begins to feel as thin as the Antarctic air. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the legendary explorer who had already carved his name into the history of the poles, was given command of 13 ships, dozens of aircraft, and more than 4,000 men. It was a fleet prepared for war, not for weather stations. And as they crossed the Southern Ocean and approached that towering ice wall, they were about to encounter reality that would change Byrd forever and haunt the corridors of power for decades to come. Picture the scene as this massive armada breached the pack ice. The sailors and pilots were some of the most experienced in the world. Yet as they neared the heart of the continent, the atmosphere began to shift. The instruments they relied upon started to behave with a frantic, unpredictable energy. Compasses spun. Radio signals dissolved into a strange, rhythmic static. And then the reconnaissance flights began. Byrd himself took to the sky, venturing further into the interior than any human had dared. What he reported upon his return was not the endless, frozen desert the world expected to hear about. He spoke of a land beyond the pole, a region as large as the United States that remained untouched by the ice that gripped the rest of the continent. He described lush green valleys, flowing rivers of warm water, and mountain ranges that stood bare and defiant against the Antarctic winter. To the public, it sounded like the daydream of a man suffering from the isolation of the ice. But to Byrd, it was a physical truth that defied everything science claimed to know about the bottom of the world. But the mystery of the Green Valleys was only the beginning. As the weeks passed, the tone of the expedition shifted from discovery to something far more urgent and dangerous. Rumors began to circulate among the crew of shadows that moved beneath the water with impossible speed, and of lights in the sky that performed maneuvers no aircraft of that era could ever replicate. Then came the incident that was never meant to reach the history books. Witnesses from the task force would later speak in hushed tones of an encounter that took place near the ice wall. They described sleek, silver craft, shaped like discs that emerged from the dark waters or the clouds with a silence that was more terrifying than any engine roar. These craft possessed a technology that made the finest United States warships look like toys. They moved with a grace that ignored the laws of physics, and when they engaged the task force, the results were catastrophic. Beams of light, silent and precise, were said to have struck the aircraft and ships, disabling equipment and causing sudden, unexplained failures. Operation High Jump was scheduled to last for 8 months. It was a mission designed for long-term mapping and strategic development. Yet, after only 8 weeks, the entire task force was ordered to retreat. The ships turned back, fleeing the ice with a haste that suggested they were running from a predator they couldn't hope to defeat. When Admiral Byrd returned to the United States, he was greeted not with a fanfare of successful explorer, but with the heavy hand of military secrecy. He was debriefed for hours. His records were classified, and his public statements were carefully managed. But during a stop in Chile, he gave a single, startling interview to the newspaper El Mercurio. In those pages, he issued a warning that remains one of the most chilling statements in the history of exploration. He said that it was a bitter reality that in the event of a new war, the United States would be attacked by flying objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Who was he talking about? What force had he encountered at the edge of the world that possessed such overwhelming power? For years, the official records remained silent, but the whispers refused to die. The mystery deepened when fragments of what many claim to be Byrd's secret diary began to surface. If these entries are to be believed, Byrd's experience was far more profound than a simple military skirmish. He wrote of being forced down by the mysterious craft and being led into a world beneath the ice. He described encountering beings of immense height and calm authority, who spoke of humanity's destructive path and the danger we pose to ourselves. They were the guardians of the ice, a civilization that had remained hidden for millennia, watching our progress from their sanctuary beyond the wall. They possess a mastery of energy and consciousness that transcended our understanding, and they made it clear that the frozen continent was under their protection. Byrd wrote that he was returned to his plane with a message for the leaders of the world, a warning that our arrival in their realm was premature and that the ice would remain a barrier until we learned to live in harmony with the planet. Whether the diary is a genuine record or a carefully crafted myth, the physical evidence of Byrd's change of heart is undeniable. The man who had been a tireless advocate for Antarctic exploration became a figure of quiet caution. He spoke no more of new territories to conquer. Instead, he spoke of mysteries that the world was not yet ready to understand. The secrecy surrounding Operation High Jump became the foundation for the Antarctic Treaty, a global agreement that effectively placed the continent under a permanent military and scientific lock and key. Why did the most powerful nations on Earth agree to never claim this land? Why did they create vast no-fly zones over the very areas where Byrd reported seeing the green valleys and the disc-shaped craft? The answers lie buried beneath layers of security clearances, in archives that few are permitted to enter. But imagine for a moment what it must have been like for those 4,000 men. They were soldiers and sailors who had just survived the most brutal war in history, only to find themselves face to face with a power they couldn't even name. They saw their technology rendered useless by craft that moved like spirits through the air. They saw their commanders shaken by what they witnessed beyond the ice wall. When they returned home, they were told to forget what they had seen. They were told that the pilots who disappeared were lost of weather, and that the damage to the ships was a result of the harsh environment. But in the quiet hours of the night, many of them told a different story. They told of the silver discs that rose from the Ross Sea. They told of the sudden, unnatural heat that blossomed in the middle of the frozen wasteland. and they told of the eyes of Admiral Byrd, which seemed to reflect a light that didn't come from the sun. This was the encounter that set the stage for the modern mystery of Antarctica. It was a moment the world's governments realized that the ice wall was not just a geographical boundary, but a threshold to a realm that defied their control. Operation High Jump was supposed to be a show of force, a statement that the United States could dominate even the most remote corners of the globe. Instead, it was a humbling reminder that there are forces on this earth that do not answer to any flag. The guardians of the ice had made their presence known, and the response in the surface world was a desperate, coordinated effort to ensure that the secret remained frozen in silence. As we look back at Byrd's mission, we are left to wonder about the lands he saw. Are there truly green valleys hidden behind the mountains of ice, warmed by geothermal forces or technologies we cannot conceive? Is there a world beneath the surface, a hollow realm where an ancient civilization keeps its vigil? Byrd's words suggest that the Antarctic is not a dead continent, but a living sanctuary, protected by a force that considers us intruders. The ships and planes of Operation High Jump were the first modern trespassers to feel the weight of that protection. They were the ones who brought back the first real evidence that the ice wall is not the end of the world, but the beginning of a mystery that stretches into the infinite. The silence that followed their return was not the silence of successful mission, but the silence of a world that had been warned. And in the decades since, that warning has only grown louder for those who know how to listen to the whispers of the ice. Imagine for a moment that the towering wall of ice we have been tracing is not the final boundary of our world, but merely the rim of a massive, frozen doorway. What if the secrets of Antarctica do not lie only on its surface, or even deep within its glaciers, but further down, beneath the bedrock itself? For centuries, a persistent and unsettling theory has suggested that our planet is not the solid, dense sphere described in textbooks, but a hollow vessel containing worlds within worlds. And the entrance to this forbidden interior, according to those who have studied the whispers of the ice, lies hidden at the very bottom of the globe, guarded by the white ramparts of the Antarctic continent. This is the mystery of the hollow earth, a concept that bridges a gap between ancient mythology, 19th century science, and the most classified military expeditions of the modern age. It is a story of civilizations that retreated from the surface to find sanctuary in the dark, of oceans that flow where fire should be, and of a central sun that illuminates a land untouched by the passage of time. To many, it is the ultimate conspiracy, a secret so vast that every map of the southern pole must be altered and every explorer must be silenced. But to understand why people believe the ice wall hides a path to the interior, we must look at the men who first dared to suggest that the Earth is not what it seems. The idea did not begin with modern theorists, but with some of the most respected minds in history. In the late 17th century, Edmund Halley, the man who calculated the orbit of the famous comet that bears his name, proposed that the Earth consisted of a series of nested shells, each with its own atmosphere and possibly its own life. He was followed by Leonard Euler, one of the greatest mathematicians to ever live, who suggested a hollow Earth with a single inner sun that provided warmth and light to a subterranean world. These were not the ramblings of the uneducated, but the calculated theories of men who observed anomalies in gravity and magnetism that they could not explain with solid Earth model. Yet it was a 19th century American soldier named John Clevey Sims Jr. who turned these scientific theories into a crusade. He spent years petitioning Congress to fund an expedition to the poles, claiming that a massive opening existed at the bottom of the world, a portal he called Sims Hole. He believed that the climate at the pole would be surprisingly temperate, heated by the warmth rising from the planet's interior. While he died before he could prove his theory, his ideas took root in the public imagination, fueling a century of stories about hidden realms and ancient guardians. The most famous and controversial piece of this puzzle centers on Admiral Richard Byrd. We have spoken of his military missions and his cryptic warnings about lands beyond the pole, but there's a deeper, more shadow-filled layer to his story. In certain circles, it is whispered that during his flight over the South Pole, Byrd did not just see uncharted mountains, but physical entrance into the Earth itself. There are accounts, often suppressed or dismissed as hoaxes, of a secret diary kept by the Admiral. In its pages, he supposedly describes a transition from the white blindness of the Antarctic storm into a lush, green world where the temperature was 74 degrees and the air was filled with the scent of flowers. According to these accounts, Byrd encountered a civilization of beings who called their realm Agartha. They were tall, pale, and possessed technology that made his aircraft feel like a primitive toy. They spoke to him of their concern for humanity, especially after the use of atomic weapons, and warned that if surface dwellers did not learn to live in peace, the barriers between the inner and outer worlds would remain sealed. When Byrd returned, his reports were allegedly classified at the highest level, and he was ordered to remain silent about what he had seen beyond the ice wall. Whether this diary is a genuine record or an elaborate fiction, the fact remains that Byrd's public statements were always laden with a sense of wonder and warning that the government worked tirelessly to contain. Why does this theory persist even in an age of satellite imagery and global communication? To find the answer, one must look at what the maps do not show. If you search for images of the South Pole on public databases, you'll often find a curiously blurred circle or a blacked-out patch at the exact center of the continent. Official explanations cite the limitations of satellite orbits or technical glitches in image stitching. But to those who believe the ice wall is a guardian of the interior, these are the electronic fingerprints of a cover-up. They argue that if we could see the pole clearly, we would witness a massive depression, a gateway where the atmosphere itself seems to swirl downward into the throat of the world. There are also the seismic anomalies that continue to baffle researchers. When earthquakes ripple through the planet, the waves behave in ways that some geophysicists find difficult to reconcile with solid core. In the late 20th century, deep core drilling projects in the Antarctic reported hearing strange, rhythmic pulses rising from miles below the ice, sounds that did not match the grinding of tectonic plates. These acoustic anomalies have been described as the breathing of the planet or the hum of distant, massive machinery. If there are indeed hollow spaces beneath the Antarctic crust, these sounds could be the echoes of a living world, vibrating through the very foundation of the ice wall. The legend of Agartha also connects to the ancient traditions of the East, where stories of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of enlightened beings, have existed for millennia. It was said that the entrance to this realm lay in the most inaccessible places on Earth, protected by guardians of living energy. In the years leading up to the Second World War, the occult-obsessed leaders of Nazi Germany were so convinced of this reality that they sent expeditions to the Himalayas and to Antarctica, seeking a path to the inner world. They believed that by making contact with these ancient subterranean masters, they could obtain technology that would allow them to rule the surface. This is the origin of the rumors surrounding the Nazi base in New Swabia, a facility that some claim was not just a military outpost, but an embassy to the world below. Even more unsettling are the stories of the Smoky God, a narrative based on supposed experiences of a sailor named Olaf Jansen. In the early 19th century, Jansen claimed that he and his father sailed through an opening at the pole and spent 2 years living with a race of giants who inhabited a world inside the earth. He described a central sun that appeared smoky or dim compared to our own, and a landscape of incredible abundance where the trees were hundreds of feet tall and the fruit was the size of a man's head. When they eventually returned to the surface, his father was lost, and Jansen was imprisoned in an asylum for decades because no one would believe his story. It was only in his final days that he shared his account, a testimony that mirrors the descriptions found in Admiral Byrd's suppressed diary. The Antarctic Treaty itself, which we have examined as a tool of environmental protection, takes on a much darker tone when viewed through the lens of the hollow Earth. If there are indeed entrances to an interior world, then the treaty is not just about keeping people out of the cold. It is about preventing anyone from discovering the lid. By declaring the entire continent a no-fly zone in certain regions and restricting travel to a few tightly controlled scientific paths, the world's governments have effectively placed the interior of our planet under quarantine. The ice wall serves as a perfect physical and psychological barrier. It is a place so hostile and vast that very few would think to look past it, and those who do are met with the full force of international law. As we journey deeper into these subterranean whispers, we must ask ourselves what would mean if the theory were true. If the ice wall is not the edge of the world, but the doorway to another, then our entire understanding of history and science is a carefully constructed illusion. It would mean that we are the surface dwellers, the tenants of the crust, while the true masters of the planet reside in the warmth of the interior, watching our developments with a mixture of concern and detachment. The guardians we have spoken of, the pale beings in the glowing spheres, might not be visitors from another planet at all. They might be the sentinels of the hollow Earth, rising to the surface only when a boundary is threatened or when a message must be delivered to the world above. Tonight, as the wind howls across the frozen plateau and the ice groans under its own impossible weight, listen to the silence that follows. Beneath that silence is a vibration, a low, constant hum that seems to rise from the very center of the earth. It is the sound of a mystery that refuses to be buried, a story of a world within our own that is older, stranger, and perhaps more real than the one we walk upon. The ice wall stands there still, a gleaming white fortress, holding back the weight of the sea and the weight of the truth. But for those who know how to look through the blur of the maps and the silence of the treaties, the wall is not a dead end. It is an invitation to look down, to wonder what lies beneath the bedrock, and to consider the possibility that we have only ever known the skin of the world, while the heart beats in the dark, far below the ice. Picture a world where the lines between history and nightmare begin to blur like a horizon in a whiteout storm. We have walked along the edges of the ice wall and stared into the glowing eyes of guardians that should not exist. But now we must descend into a different kind of darkness. A darkness not of ancient spirits or alien visitors, but of human ambition pushed to the very limits of the known world. This is the legend of Base 211. It is a story that has haunted the archives of the 20th century, a ghost that refuses to be buried by the shifting snows of official denial. It is a tale of a secret fortress, a hidden empire, and a mystery that began when the world was at war and the Southern Ocean became a playground for shadows. The origins of this enigma lead us back to the year 1938. As the shadows of the Second Global Conflict gathered over Europe, a German expedition led by Captain Alfred Richer set sail for the Antarctic coast. Their destination was a region they called New Swabia, a vast stretch of Queen Maud land that had remained untouched by human feet for millennia. Officially, the mission was a matter of economics and resource security. They claimed they were there to protect the whaling industry and to map the coastline for the future of the Third Reich. But as their planes took to the sky, dropping metal stakes marked with symbols of their ideology into the ice, something changed. The pilots returned with reports that did not fit the cold reality of the frozen South. They spoke of mountain ranges that rose like jagged teeth in the plains, and most curiously, they spoke of warm water ponds, oases of steam and life hidden in the heart of the ice where the geothermal heat of the earth had carved out sanctuaries from perpetual winter. It is here that the legend of Base 211 begins to take root. For decades, researchers of the unexplained have whispered that these geothermal sanctuaries were not just a curiosity of geology, but the foundation for something far more significant. They suggest that beneath the mountains of New Swabia, the expedition discovered a labyrinth of caverns, vast, hollow spaces warmed by the volcanic heart of the continent, hidden from the eyes of the world and the reach of any enemy. The theory claims that while the rest of the world burned in the fires of war, a secret project was underway in the silence of the Antarctic night. A project to build a fortress that could survive the fall of any empire, a place where advanced technology and forbidden sciences could be nurtured far from the prying eyes of conventional history. They called it Station 211. The evidence for such a facility is often found in what was left behind and what mysteriously disappeared. When the war finally ended in 1945, the world watched as a broken nation surrendered, but the tally of its assets did not seem to add up. Hundreds of submarines, the famous U-boats, were reportedly missing from the final counts. Where did they go? Why did some of them appear months later in the ports of South America? Their crews silent and their cargo manifests empty. In July of 1945, the submarine U-530 arrived in Mar del Plata, Argentina, followed weeks later by U-977. The crews were interrogated, but their stories were full of gaps and contradictions. Rumors began to circulate that these vessels were part of a secret convoy, a fleet designed to transport the elite and the most sensitive technologies of the fallen regime to a sanctuary at the bottom of the world. They whispered of a southern refuge where the war had never truly ended, but had simply gone underground. If Base 211 exists, it is more than just a military outpost. It is described as a city of the future built within the bones of the past. Those who follow the legend speak of underground hangars capable of housing aircraft that defy the aerodynamics of the mid-20th century. They talk of experimental energy sources that draw power from the magnetic anomalies of the pole, and of research into a physics that the rest of the world is only beginning to understand. But why has it never been found? Why has the most surveyed continent on Earth managed to hide a fortress of such magnitude? The answer, according to believers, lies in the ice itself. Antarctica is a continent that is constantly moving, a landscape of shifting glaciers and hidden crevasses that can swallow a city and leave no trace on the surface. And then there is the matter of the official silence. Why did the United States launch Operation High Jump so soon after the war? Why send 13 ships, thousands of men, and an entire carrier group to the Antarctic in 1946? Officially, it was a training exercise, a test of equipment in polar conditions. But the scale of the operation suggested a search for an enemy rather than a search for scientific data. Admiral Richard Byrd, the man who led the mission, returned with a warning that was as cryptic as it was terrifying. He spoke of a need for the United States to adopt protective measures against the possibility of an invasion by aircraft that could fly from pole to pole with incredible speed. Was he talking about a new enemy from the stars? Or was he talking about the inhabitants of Base 211? Some say that the mission of Operation High Jump was cut short because they found exactly what they were looking for. They whisper of a confrontation near the coast of New Swabia, an engagement between conventional naval forces, and craft that emerged from the water and the ice with a technology that made the American fleet look like toys. They speak of energy beams that disabled ships and psychological effects that left crews disoriented and haunted. When the fleet returned months ahead of schedule, the official reports mentioned only harsh weather and the loss of a few aircraft to accidents. But the men who were there told a different story in the safety of their homes, a story of an encounter with a power that they were not prepared to face. In the years that followed, the mystery of Base 211 did not fade. It only moved deeper into the shadows of the Cold War. Both the American and Soviet governments established permanent bases in Antarctica, often positioning them near the very regions where the secret German expedition had focused its efforts. They called it research, but the level of security surrounding these installations suggests something far more sensitive. Even today, if you look at satellite imagery of the Queen Maud Land region, you will find areas that are strangely blurred or censored. Coordinates that correspond to the alleged location of the base are often missing from public databases, and no-fly zones cover the mountains where the warm water ponds were first sighted. What if the guardians we discussed in previous chapters are not alien at all? What if the pale figures and the glowing orbs of the inhabitants of this human fortress evolved or altered by decades of isolation and the use of technologies that have long been hidden from the rest of us? The legend of Base 211 suggests that a branch of humanity has been living in the ice for over 80 years, developing in a direction that is entirely separate from our own. They have become the ghosts in our machine, the silent watchers of the southern sky, protecting a secret that is too disruptive to be revealed. They are the wardens of a history that was supposed to have ended in 1945, but instead found a new life in the frozen darkness. Think about the implications of such a discovery. If a secret civilization has been thriving beneath the ice, then everything we know about the balance of power on our planet is an illusion. The Antarctic Treaty, which presents a continent as a peaceful preserve for science, would be nothing more than a legal front, a global agreement to look the other way while a more powerful neighbor occupies the South. It would mean that the most significant technological advancements of the last century did not happen in the laboratories of Silicon Valley or the hangars of Nevada, but in the geothermal caverns of New Swabia. The legend of Base 211 is a reminder that the world is much larger and more mysterious than the maps allow us to believe. It is a story that challenges our understanding of truth and the narratives that governments weave to keep the peace. Whether it is a real place of steel and steam or a psychological phantom created by the trauma of war, the base represents the ultimate secret. It is a fortress of the unknown, a place where the shadows of the past continue to influence the reality of our present. As we stand at the edge of this frozen mystery, we must ask ourselves what we would do if the ice finally gave up its secrets. If the doors to Base 211 were opened, will we find an enemy, or will we find a reflection of our own darkest impulses? The ice wall of Antarctica stands as a guardian of many things, but perhaps its most enduring secret is the one that we build ourselves. The base is still there in the stories, in the blurred images, and in the silence of the veterans who saw things they were never supposed to mention. It is a shadow in the snow, a chilling reminder that in the heart of the most desolate place on earth, the human spirit can find a way to survive, to hide, and to wait. The wind continues to sweep across the plains of Queen Maud Land, erasing the tracks of every expedition and burying the stake of every empire. But beneath the layers of white, in the spaces where the heat of the earth meets the cold of the pole, the legend of Base 211 remains warm. It is a pulse in the ice, a mechanical rhythm that echoes through the caverns, reminding us that the story of Antarctica is far from over. It is a story that is written in frost and iron, a narrative that suggests the ice wall is not just a boundary of nature, but a barrier of our own making. Tonight, as the cold air of the room settles around you and the world outside feels distant and small, let your mind drift to those hidden hangars and the silent submarines. Imagine the glow of artificial lights reflected in the walls of a subglacial city, and the faces of those who have forgotten the sun. The mystery of Base 211 is a doorway that leads into the very heart of human secrecy. It is a final fortress, the last redoubt, the place where the shadows of history go to rest. And as we prepare to move deeper into the frozen unknown, remember that the most dangerous secrets are often the ones that feel the most like a dream. The ice is deep, the secrets are many, and the story of the Southern Fortress is only one layer of the mystery that waits beneath the white silence. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in the middle of a world that has been scrubbed clean of all color. For miles in every direction, there is nothing but the blinding, oppressive whiteness of the Antarctic interior. The air is so cold it feels like glass in your lungs, and the silence is so absolute that you can hear the rhythm of your own heart echoing against the frozen plains. You are walking along the edge of the Taylor Glacier, a massive river of ice that has remained frozen for millions of years. And then, without warning, the whiteness is shattered. At the base of the glacier, a jagged crack opens up, and out of it flows a liquid so deeply, shockingly red that it looks like a fresh wound in the side of the planet. This is the place known as Blood Falls, a 5-story tall waterfall of crimson liquid that seeps from the ice and stains the pristine snow like a grotesque calling card from the depths of the earth. Since its discovery in 1911, it has remained one of the most unsettling and visually arresting mysteries of the southern continent. But as we have learned in our journey across the ice wall, nothing in Antarctica is quite as simple as the official explanation suggests. Tonight, we look past the charts and the chemical formulas to ask a deeper, more disturbing question. Is Blood Falls merely a geological curiosity, or is it a leak in a container, a crimson evidence of something ancient and alive that was never meant to reach the surface? When explorer Griffith Taylor first stumbled upon this site over a century ago, he and his team were horrified. They believed they were witnessing the literal blood of the continent, as if the glacier itself were a living entity that had been punctured. Later, scientists offered a more rational explanation. They told us the red color comes from iron-rich brine, a saltwater solution that oxidizes when it hits the air, turning into rust. It is a simple answer. It is a clean answer. But like so many official stories in Antarctica, it begins to crumble when you look at the details that were left out of the public reports. Why is this the only place on the entire continent where such a phenomenon occurs? Why does the flow of this crimson liquid follow rhythmic patterns that seem to correspond with seismic anomalies detected deep beneath the transantarctic mountains? And why did the research teams who visited the falls in 2017 return with data that was immediately classified under national security protocols? To understand the secrets of Blood Falls, we must go beneath the ice into a realm that has been sealed away from the rest of the world for more than 5 million years. Deep under the Taylor Glacier lies a hidden hypersaline lake. It is a body of water that has seen no light, no oxygen, and no contact with the outside atmosphere since before the first human ancestors walked the earth. It is a time capsule of an alien world, preserved in total darkness. In recent years, researchers managed to sample the liquid from the falls and discovered something that sent shock waves through the scientific community. The water was teeming with life. Not the kind of life we recognize, but a community of microbes that have evolved to survive in conditions that should be impossible. They live without photosynthesis. They live without oxygen. They survive by breathing iron and sulfur, recycling the same ancient nutrients in a closed loop that has continued for eons. But here is where the mystery deepens. Some independent researchers who analyzed the genetic markers of these microbes found sequences that do not match anything in the global database of terrestrial life. They are extremophiles that seem to belong to another world entirely. This led to a radical theory that the liquid flowing from Blood Falls is not just water. It is the lifeblood of an ecosystem that exists within the hollow spaces of the ice wall, a network of subglacial rivers and lakes that might be the home of something far more complex than simple bacteria. Think back to the accounts of early explorers who spoke of the ice wall as an artificial rampart. If that wall is indeed a container, then what is it containing? There are those who believe that blood falls is a deliberate release valve, a way for the pressure of a massive hidden civilization or a subterranean energy source to vent its byproducts into the open air. In 1947, during Operation High Jump, there were reports of pilots flying near the Taylor Glacier who witnessed the falls glowing with a faint, internal luminescence during the long Antarctic night. They described the crimson liquid not as water, but as a thick, viscous substance that moved with a strange, deliberate fluidity, as if it were responding to an external signal. When these pilots reported their sightings, they were told that the glow was a trick of the moonlight reflecting off the ice. But their flight logs, many of which remain buried in military archives, tell a different story. They spoke of a low-frequency hum that resonated through the cockpits of their planes whenever they approached the falls. A sound that felt like a heartbeat, slow and heavy, vibrating through the very structure of the glacier. Could it be that the blood falls is the visible tip of a massive biological machine? A cooling system for a hidden facility buried miles beneath the surface? Or perhaps as a message, a crimson warning etched into a white landscape to tell us that some boundaries are meant to remain sealed. The local legends of the indigenous peoples of the far south often speak of the great white spirit of the ice that bleeds when the balance of the world is disturbed. They tell stories of shamans who traveled in their dreams to the edge of the Great Wall and saw the crimson leak, calling it the tears of the earth. These weren't just metaphors for geological activity. They were specific descriptions of a threshold being breached. In the modern era, satellite imagery of the Blood Falls region is notoriously difficult to access. If you look at public mapping databases, the area around the Taylor Glacier often appears blurred, or the images are dated by several years. When independent researchers have attempted to use high-resolution ground-penetrating radar near the falls, they have encountered sudden and inexplicable equipment failures. Their batteries drain in minutes. Their digital sensors fill with static. One former researcher, speaking under the veil of anonymity, described a mission to the falls in the late 1990s. He claimed that his team discovered geometric patterns carved into the rock behind the waterfall, hidden beneath the flow of the red brine. These weren't natural cracks. They were precise, angular symbols that appeared to be part of a larger linguistic or mathematical system. Before they could document the find, the expedition was halted by unmarked military personnel who arrived by helicopter. The team was escorted from the site. Their film was confiscated, and they were told that they had wandered into a restricted seismic testing zone. They were never allowed to return, and the symbols they saw have never been mentioned in any academic paper. What is being hidden at the source of the crimson leak? If the water contains microbes that defy terrestrial biology, then what else is living in that 5-million-year-old lake? Some suggest that Antarctica is not a dead continent, but a hibernating one. The Blood Falls may be proof that the heart of the southern fortress is still beating, circulating ancient energy through a system of veins that we are only beginning to glimpse. There are accounts from workers at the nearby McMurdo station who speak of the crimson liquid appearing in unexpected places, seeping up to floorboards of remote outposts or appearing in isolated snowdrifts miles away from the Taylor Glacier. They call it the creeping red, and they speak of it with a sense of dread that goes far beyond a simple fear of rust. They describe a sensation of being watched whenever the red liquid is present, an overwhelming feeling of a presence that is ancient, cold, and profoundly indifferent to human life. It is as if the liquid itself carries a form of consciousness, a memory of the world as it was millions of years ago, before the ice claimed the land. As we look at the shimmering red curtains of the Blood Falls, we have to ask ourselves if we are looking at the past or the future. If the ice wall is melting, as the official records tell us, then what happens when a container finally fails? What happens when the crimson leak becomes a flood, and the ancient things that have been breathing iron and sulfur in the dark for 5 million years are finally released into our world? The ice is not just a barrier, it is a guardian, and the blood falls is a reminder that even the strongest fortress has its cracks. It is a sign that beneath the silence and the whiteness, there's a world of heat and color and ancient, terrifying life. As you close your eyes tonight and let the image of the red water drifting over the white ice fill your mind, remember that some secrets cannot be contained forever. The crimson leak is a pulse, a signal, a rhythmic heartbeat from a world that was supposed to be dead. Why is it that the nations of the world are so protective of this specific region? Why do the flight paths of reconnaissance missions avoid the Taylor Glacier during the winter months? The answers lie in the data we are not allowed to see, in the photographs that have been scrubbed from the archives, and in the journals of men who stood before the falls and felt the ice whisper truths that would shatter our understanding of biology and history. They saw the red water, and they knew that they were looking at the lifeblood of a mystery that is far older than humanity. The story of the blood falls is the story of the ice wall itself, a story of boundaries that are being tested, of secrets that are leaking into the light, and of a continent that is far more alive than we have ever dared to imagine. As we move deeper into the mysteries of the Southern Fortress, we must be prepared to face the possibility that the ice is not our property. It is a temporary seal over reality that is waiting for its moment to return. And when it does, the crimson stain on the snow will be the first of many things that we can no longer ignore. Tonight, the falls continue to flow in the darkness of the Antarctic winter. The red liquid pulses through the ice, carrying the secrets of 5 million years into the frozen air. The silence of the Taylor Glacier is absolute, broken only by the sound of water hitting the ice, a rhythmic, mechanical sound that echoes like a clock ticking down to zero. The crimson leak is a countdown, a reminder that the ice wall is not just a wall, but a threshold. And on the other side of that threshold, the ancient world is waking up. Sleep now, and let your dreams take you to the edge of the falls, where the white meets the red, and where the secrets of the ice wall are written in the color of life itself. The journey is far from over, and the deeper we go, the more the ice reveals that the most profound mysteries are the ones that are hidden in plain sight, bleeding through the cracks of our world. Imagine a boundary that is not made of stone or wire, but of ink and absolute silence. While we have spent our journey tracing the physical mystery of the ice wall and the whispers of what might dwell within its frozen heart, we must now confront the invisible cage that surrounds it. This is the story of how the entire world decided to stop looking at the bottom of the map. In December 1959, a document was signed that would change the destiny of the Antarctic continent forever. On its surface, it was hailed as a miracle of diplomacy, a rare moment where the freezing winds of the Cold War seemed to pause. The United States and the Soviet Union, two empires that could not agree on the time of day, suddenly stood side by side to declare that Antarctica would belong to no one. They called it the Antarctic Treaty. It was presented to the public as a noble effort to preserve a pristine wilderness for science and peace. But if you look closer at the edges of this agreement, you begin to see the shape of an iron grip. Why would nations that were currently carving up the rest of the planet for oil, gold, and influence suddenly decide to leave a land twice the size of Australia completely untouched? Why would they ban military activity, mining, and even unauthorized travel? Some believe the treaty was not a gesture of peace, but a pact of containment, a global agreement to ensure that whatever lies behind that towering wall of ice remains a secret known only to a few. Think about the timing of this treaty. In the late 1950s, Technology was finally catching up to the mystery of the South. We had the long-range aircraft, the heavy icebreakers, and the early satellite systems that could finally pierce the veil. Yet, just as the door was beginning to open, the world's most powerful governments rushed to slam it shut. The treaty established what are known as the Forbidden Latitudes. Any land or ice shelf south of 60 degrees latitude was placed under a form of international lockdown that has no equivalent anywhere else on Earth. To this day, you cannot simply sail to Antarctica. You cannot start a business there. You cannot fly a private plane over its vast interior without a mountain of permissions that are almost never granted to ordinary citizens. It is the only continent where you are a trespasser by default. This is the iron grip. It is a legal and physical barrier that serves as the modern incarnation of those ancient maps that warn of dragons. Only today, the dragons are guarded by naval patrols and high-resolution surveillance. Why did the original 12 nations agree to this so readily? The official records tell a story of environmental concern, but the whispers tell a story of a discovery so profound it forced enemies to become allies. Some researchers point to the fact that the treaty was signed shortly after Admiral Richard Byrd's final expeditions. Byrd had spoken of a land beyond the pole, a place of mystery that existed outside our known geography. Could it be that the treaty was a reaction to what Byrd found? If there really is an ice wall that guards a hidden realm, or if the continent is something other than a simple landmass, the world powers would have realized they could not control it. And if they could not control it, they had to hide it. The treaty became the ultimate non-disclosure agreement. It ensures that only government-sanctioned scientists, those who have been vetted and sworn to secrecy, are allowed to walk upon the ice. These researchers are restricted to specific areas, their movements tracked, their communications monitored. They're the only eyes we have on the ground, and their eyes see only what they're allowed to see. This system of control extends into the digital world. Have you ever tried to zoom in on certain parts of Antarctica using public satellite maps? You will often find strange anomalies. Vast stretches of the interior are blurred out or covered by low-resolution patches that look like digital smudges. When asked, the mapping companies talk about technical glitches or a lack of satellite coverage. But why do these glitches always seem to happen over the areas where the most intriguing anomalies have been reported? Why are there perfect circles of missing data near the South Pole? It is as if a digital curtain has been pulled over the most sensitive parts of the frozen South. This is part of the iron grip, a coordinated effort to ensure that even from space, our curiosity is kept at a distance. If the ice wall is as massive and deliberate as the early explorers claimed, the best way to hide it from a modern population is to simply remove it from the digital map. But the iron grip is not just about laws and pixels. It is about the people who have tried to cross those forbidden latitudes. There are numerous accounts of independent explorers, those brave or foolish enough to try and reach the interior without government backing, who have met with sudden and absolute resistance. In the early 2000s, a group of adventurers attempted to sail their private vessel toward the Ross Ice Shelf. They were intercepted hundreds of miles from the coast by unmarked naval vessels. These ships had no flags, and the crews refused to identify themselves. They simply blocked the path and made it clear that any further movement south would be met with force. These were not the actions of a scientific community protecting penguins. These were the actions of a military blockade. Where do these ships come from? Who pays for their fuel and their silence? The Antarctic Treaty supposedly bans military activity, yet the waters of the South are patrolled by forces that answer to no public authority. This brings us to the most enigmatic part of the iron grip, the high-profile visits that have occurred over the last decade. In November 2016, While the rest of the world was focused on a historic election in the United States, Secretary of State John Kerry made a sudden and unexplained trip to Antarctica. The official reason was to highlight climate change, but the timing was beyond suspicious. Why would one of the most powerful diplomats on Earth leave his post at such a critical moment to stand on the ice? He was not the only one. Shortly after, Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, also traveled to the south. He was followed by a parade of astronauts and world leaders. What were they all doing there? Some believe they were called to the ice wall for a summit that the rest of humanity was never meant to know about. They were not there to look at glaciers. They were there to pay respects to something older and far more powerful. When Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, returned from his own Antarctic visit, he was reportedly evacuated for medical reasons. But before he was silenced, a cryptic message appeared on his social media account. It was a photo of a pyramid-shaped mountain with the words, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself." The post was quickly deleted and blamed on a hack, but the shadow of those words remains. What did an astronaut see on the ice that could terrify him more than the vacuum of space? The iron grip of the Antarctic Treaty is a shield that protects the world from a truth it may not be ready to face. We are told that the continent is a barren wasteland, a desert of ice that is only useful for measuring ice cores and tracking weather patterns. But if that were true, there would be no need for the intense security, the no-fly zones, and the classified protocols. You do not guard an empty room with this much intensity. The secrecy itself is a confession. It tells us that there is something behind the ice wall, something that requires the absolute cooperation of every major nation on Earth. Whether it is the remnants of a lost civilization, a gateway to another world, or the very edge of our reality, the treaty ensures that it remains out of reach. The forbidden latitudes are more than just a line on a map. They are the boundary of our collective understanding. As long as the Antarctic Treaty remains in force, as long as the iron grip holds, the secrets of the ice wall will belong to those who walk the corridors of power. They tell us it is for our own safety, for the protection of the environment, or for the pursuit of science. But tonight, as the cold wind of the south whispers through the cracks of our world, we have to ask ourselves a different question. Is the treaty there to protect the ice from us, or is it there to protect us from what lies beyond the ice? The wall stands, silent and vast, guarded by laws and legends alike. And though we are forbidden from crossing it, our minds can still wander into the white void, seeking the truth that the world has tried so hard to hide. The iron grip may control the land, but it cannot control the human spirit that refuses to stop asking what lies in the shadows of the forbidden South. As we look at the legacy of the 19th century explorers and compare it to the modern era of restricted access, the contrast is staggering. Captain Ross and Captain Cook sailed into the unknown with nothing but wooden ships and the stars to guide them. They faced the ice wall with eyes wide open. Today, we have every technological advantage, yet we are less free to explore the South than we were 200 years ago. The map has been filled in with government labels and prohibited zones. We have traded the wonder of discovery for the safety of a managed reality. The iron grip has turned the last frontier into a museum where the exhibits are hidden behind a heavy curtain. But curtains eventually fray. The ice is moving. The world is changing, and the secrets that have been held for 60 years are beginning to bleed through. The latitudes may be forbidden, but the truth has a way of finding its way home. Think about the sailors of old who spoke of the wall as a living thing. They described it not just as a barrier of ice, but as a sentinel that seemed to watch them as they skirted its base. Perhaps the Antarctic Treaty is simply the modern way of acknowledging that sentinel. Perhaps the world's leaders realized that the wall was not something to be conquered, but something to be respected. The iron grip is their way of keeping a distance, of ensuring that humanity does not stumble into a confrontation it cannot win. It is a fragile peace, built on a foundation of classified documents and blurred satellite images. But as long as that peace holds, the ice wall remains the ultimate mystery, a towering rampart at the edge of the world, protected by the most successful conspiracy in human history. The journey beyond the forbidden latitudes is a path few will ever walk. But for those who dare to listen, the ice continues to tell its story, one whisper at a time, through the cracks in the iron grip. Imagine a place where the air is so cold it shatters like glass, where the wind screams of the fury of 1,000 ghosts, and where the sun disappears for months at a time, leaving the world in a state of eternal, frigid twilight. This is Vostok Station, the pole of cold, the most isolated research outpost on the surface of our planet. It sits atop a sheet of ice nearly 4 kilometers thick, a vast, white desert that hides a secret so profound it challenges our very understanding of life on Earth. Beneath this crushing weight of frozen water lies a world that has been sealed away for at least 15 million years. A body of water the size of Lake Ontario, liquid and dark, trapped in a tomb of ice that the sun has forgotten. This is Lake Vostok. And the story of its excavation is not just one of scientific triumph, but a journey into a realm where the line between geology and mythology begins to blur like breath in the freezing air. For decades, the existence of the lake was nothing more than a whisper among geographers, a mathematical possibility suggested by seismic ripples. It was not until the 1990s that radar imagery confirmed the impossible. There, beneath the heart of the East Antarctic ice sheet, lay a vast, liquid abyss. The questions began to fall like snow. How could water remain liquid at the coldest spot on Earth? What manner of creatures might dwell in a darkness that has lasted since the dawn of the Miocene? And why? As the drills moved closer to the water's surface, did the official reports become increasingly guarded, replaced by a silence as heavy as the ice itself? Tonight, we descend into the mystery of the Vostok excavation. We will look past the sanitized press releases and explore the accounts of those who claim that what was found in the depths was not just ancient water, but something that was never meant to be disturbed. We will examine the strange events of the year 2001, when a sudden media blackout coincided with rumors of a massive magnetic anomaly at the northern end of the lake, an anomaly so powerful and so precise that it triggered a cascade of theories about buried cities, ancient technology, and a world within our world that is being kept from the public eye by a global pact of secrecy. The drilling at Vostok began in the 1970s, long before the lake was officially recognized. The Soviet team was interested in ice cores, frozen archives that hold the history of our atmosphere in tiny bubbles of trapped air. But as they went deeper, the ice began to change. It became clearer, more crystalline, and its temperature began to rise. By the time they reached 3,000 meters, they realized they were no longer drilling through traditional glacial ice, but through accretion ice, water that had frozen onto the bottom of the sheet from a liquid source below. They were standing on the roof of a hidden world. As the drill bit chewed to the final layers of ice in the late 90s, the international community suddenly took an intense interest. But this interest was not entirely academic. In April 2001, a story began to circulate among independent journalists and researchers. It was claimed that the National Security Agency of the United States had taken over the mapping of the Vostok region, citing a discovery of high importance. At the northern end of the lake, sensors had detected a magnetic disturbance that defied all natural explanations. This was the Vostok anomaly, It was not a scattered signature like a deposit of ore. It was a concentrated, powerful pulse, an island of magnetic force in the middle of a barren geological plain. Some researchers who analyzed the leaked data suggested the anomaly had a geometric structure. It possessed hard angles and a symmetry that nature rarely produces on such a scale. The rumors grew louder. Was it a buried monument? A metallic craft the size of a city? Or perhaps a gateway to the hollow spaces that legends have spoken of for centuries? During this time, 2 female explorers who were attempting to cross the continent were reportedly intercepted by military personnel and evacuated without explanation. Shortly after, high-ranking officials from multiple nations made quiet, unannounced trips to the ice. Why would the leaders of the world feel compelled to visit a remote, freezing hole in the ground during a time of global transition? The official response to the anomaly was a slow, deliberate retraction. Scientists later claimed that the magnetic pulse was simply a thinning of the Earth's crust, a natural volcanic feature. But the timing of the secrecy and the sudden shifts in project funding left many unconvinced. The drilling was halted for several years, ostensibly to prevent contaminating the lake with drilling fluids. It was a noble explanation, a shield of environmental protection that conveniently kept the drill from piercing the final few meters of ice for over a decade. But what were they waiting for? Or rather, what were they doing in the darkness while the world was told the project was on hold? When the Russians finally breached the lake in February of 2012, the news was treated with a mix of celebration and suspicion. They claimed to have found nothing but water and a few fragments of DNA that did not match any known species. They spoke of a golden microbe, an organism that lived in total darkness and extreme pressure, fueled by energy sources we are only beginning to understand. But for many, the microbes were a distraction, a small truth used to hide a larger reality. If life could thrive in Lake Vostok, what kind of life was it? There are accounts from researchers who worked at Vostok who speak of strange phenomena near the borehole. They describe low-frequency vibrations that seem to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the skull. They speak of light seen beneath the ice, a soft, bioluminescent glow that pulsed with rhythm that felt almost intentional. One former technician, speaking years after his contract ended, described a sensation of being watched not by eyes, but by a presence that filled the entire chamber. He spoke of dreams that were shared by multiple team members, visions of vast, underwater arches and bridges made of material that looked like a cross between stone and glass. Is it possible that Lake Vostok is not just a lake, but a sanctuary? Some theorists believe that the ice wall of Antarctica guards more than just land. They suggest it protects an entire ecosystem that has been shielded from the cataclysms that have wiped clean the surface of our planet multiple times. In the deep, warm waters of Vostok, heated by the geothermal energy of the Earth's core, the survivors of a lost age might still exist. Whether these survivors are prehistoric animals or the remnants of an advanced civilization that moved underground as the ice began to thicken, the implication is the same. We are not the masters of this world. We are merely the current residents of its surface. The secrecy surrounding the Vostok excavation mirrors the secrecy of the ice wall itself. We are told that the Antarctic Treaty protects the continent for the good of all mankind, yet the most interesting data is always classified. We are told that the no-fly zones are for safety, yet they often center on the very coordinates where anomalies are detected. Why is the scientific community so afraid of what might be in that water? If they found evidence of an ancient technological presence, would they tell us? Or would they seal the borehole and walk away, leaving the secrets of the lost world to slumber in the dark for another 15 million years? The story of Vostok is a reminder that we live on a planet of layers. We walk upon the crust, convinced that we have mapped every corner and cataloged every secret. But beneath our feet, in the silent, pressurized depths of the southern ice, there's a frontier that remains as mysterious as the surface of a distant moon. The Vostok excavation is a doorway. It is a point where the physical world of ice and steel meets the metaphysical world of the unknown. As the drills continue to probe the darkness, we must ask ourselves what we are truly searching for. Are we looking for ancient life, or are we looking for our own forgotten history? The ice does not give up its secrets easily. It requires patience, endurance, and a willingness to face the silence of the abyss. But for those who dare to look beyond the official reports, the whispers from Vostok tell a story of a world that refuses to be forgotten, a world of liquid darkness and magnetic pulses, where the guardians of the ice wall keep their vigil over the remnants of a history that precedes the rise of man. As we move closer to the final truth, we may find that the most profound discovery is not what lies in the water, but what the water reveals about the boundaries of our own reality. The lake remains there, miles beneath the surface, a silent witness to the passage of eons. The drills may come and go, the treaties may be signed and forgotten, but the mystery of the Vostok excavation will endure as long as the ice wall stands. It is a testament to the fact that there are still places on this earth where maps are useless, and where the only guide is the courage to face what lies in the shadows of the lost world. And as we leave the freezing heights of Vostok, we carry with us a new understanding. The ice is not just a barrier. It is a veil. And behind that veil, the heart of Antarctica beats with a rhythm that is older than time, waiting for the day when the silence will finally be broken. Imagine a presence so heavy that it pulls at the very fabric of gravity itself. A weight so profound that satellites passing high above feel a sudden tug, a momentary shudder in their orbits as they glide over a specific, desolate stretch of the eastern Antarctic wilderness. This is not a mountain you can climb. It is not a valley you can see. It is something buried, something immense, and something that science has begun to call the Wilkes Land Ghost. For decades, this region was thought to be nothing more than a featureless expanse of white, a desert of ice where the wind howls over a blank and indifferent landscape. But beneath that frozen shroud, nearly 2 miles down where the light of the sun has not reached for millions of years, lies an anomaly so large it defies our standard understanding of planetary geology. Tonight, we are going to look beneath the mass of the ice at a discovery that has left researchers divided, governments silent, and the rest of us wondering what exactly is hiding at the bottom of our world. The story of the Wilkes Land Ghost begins not with an explorer on the ground, but with eyes in the sky. In 2006, 2 satellites working in tandem for the Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment began to map the gravitational field of the Antarctic continent. These satellites, affectionately nicknamed Tom and Jerry, were designed to detect minute changes in Earth's pull. As they passed over the Wilkes Land region of East Antarctica, their instruments spiked. They had found a mass concentration so dense and so vast that it created a localized lump in the planet's gravity. Picture the scale of this finding. We are talking about a feature that stretches nearly 300 miles across. To put that in perspective, this hidden mass is more than twice the size of the crater that ended the age of the dinosaurs. It is a structure so gargantuan that it could swallow several small countries, yet remains completely invisible to the naked eye, encased in a tomb of ice that is miles thick. When the data was first analyzed, the initial scientific hypothesis was that this was a massive impact crater, the result of an asteroid strike so violent it nearly cracked the planet in two. They estimated the event occurred 250 million years ago, coinciding with the Permian-Triassic extinction, a time when 90% of all life on Earth was wiped out. But as more data trickled in, the clinical explanations began to feel incomplete. There were gaps, there were inconsistencies, and there was a growing sense among independent researchers that the gravity anomaly wasn't behaving quite like a natural crater should. They began to call it a ghost because every time a team tried to get a clearer picture, the information seemed to vanish or become inexplicably corrupted. Why is it that in an era where we can map the surface of Mars in high definition, the Wilkes Land anomaly remains a blurred smudge on the public record? Why have seismic surveys of this specific region been classified under national security protocols? And what did the radar team see that prompted them to turn their equipment off and return home without a word? If you were to stand directly above the center of the Wilkes Land ghost, you would see nothing but a flat, blinding plain. But if you possess the ability to see through the frozen layers, you would find a core of something incredibly dense. In the world of geology, they call this a mascon, a mass concentration. On the moon, mascons are often associated with giant impact basins. But on Earth, they are rare, and they're usually found in the deep ocean crust. Finding one this large, buried under the continental ice of Antarctica, is like finding a heart beating inside a statue. It suggests that there is something at the center of the Wilkes Land anomaly that is not made of the same material as the surrounding bedrock. Some researchers have whispered about the possibility of a metallic structure, something so massive and so reinforced that has survived the pressure of the ice for eons. They point to the strange electromagnetic interference that pilots report when they fly near the coordinates. Compasses that spin in slow, hypnotic circles. Radio equipment that fills with a rhythmic, pulsing static that sounds less like natural interference and more like a heartbeat or a signal. There are accounts from former military pilots who describe being diverted away from the Wilkes Land sector by unmarked aircraft, sleek and silver vessels that move with fluid grace that seem to ignore the laws of inertia. When these pilots asked for a reason, they were told the area was a restricted zone due to hazardous atmospheric conditions. Yet the skies were clear and the winds were calm. Think about the sheer effort required to keep a secret that is 300 miles wide. It requires international cooperation on a scale that we rarely see in any other field. The Antarctic Treaty provides the perfect legal framework for this silence. It allows nations to declare vast areas off limits for scientific preservation, but in Wilkes Land, it feels more like a quarantine. There are no permanent research stations directly over the center of the gravity spike. The closest installations are hundreds of miles away, and the personnel there are often rotated out with frequency that seems unnecessary for routine work. Those who return from these stations sometimes speak in riddles about the sounds they heard during the long polar nights. A low, subterranean thrumming that vibrated through their boots. A sound that wasn't the wind, but a mechanical, deep resonance that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. In 2018, a seismic anomaly was detected emanating from the Wilkes Land region. It was a series of pulses, regular and rhythmic, that lasted for several days. Official reports claimed it was a series of minor ice quakes caused by the shifting of the glaciers. But independent analysts noted that the pulses were perfectly timed, occurring exactly every 27 seconds. Nature does not work on a stopwatch. Nature does not produce mathematical precision in its tremors. This was a signal, or perhaps a machine, waking up or maintaining a cycle that has been running since before the first human walked the earth. As we journey deeper into the mystery of the Wilkes Land ghost, we have to ask ourselves what it would mean if this wasn't an impact crater. What if the gravity anomaly is actually a buried facility? a structure of such impossible size that it could only have been built by a civilization that operated on a scale we can barely imagine. Some suggest it is the remains of a primary hub, a central city of a pre-glacial society that was flash frozen when the poles shifted. Others believe it is an ancient piece of technology, a planetary stabilizer, or a gateway that was buried long ago to keep it out of the hands of a developing humanity. The gravity doesn't lie. It tells us that something is there, something heavy, something permanent, and something that is being guarded with a vigilance that suggests its discovery would change everything we know about our history. When satellite imagery of Wilkes Land is released to the public, you can often see strange artifacts in the pixels, rectangular shapes that appear and disappear between different versions of the maps, geometric lines that don't match the natural flow of the ice. When researchers bring these to the attention of the authorities, the images are quickly scrubbed or replaced with lower resolution versions, cited as digital errors or sensor glitches. But how many errors can occur in the exact same spot before they become a pattern? The Wilkes Land ghost is a reminder that we are living on a planet that still has blind spots. We like to think that we have mapped every corner, that we have solved every mystery. But Antarctica is the great corrector of human ego. It sits there cold and silent, holding the Wilkes Land anomaly in its frozen grip, waiting for the day when the ice finally thins. What will we find when the ghost is finally revealed? Will it be the crater of an ancient catastrophe that nearly ended life on Earth? Or will it be a monument to a past that we were never supposed to remember? There are stories from the indigenous people of the southern islands, legends passed down through shamans who spoke of a great mountain of metal that fell from the sky and was swallowed by the ice at the bottom of the world. They called it the sleeping star and warned that to disturb its rest would be to invite the end of the current age. These legends were dismissed as folklore by the first explorers. But today, as Tom and Jared continue to feel the tug of that massive weight, those old warnings take on a chilling new significance. The Wilkes Land ghost is not just a geological curiosity. It is a sentinel. As you listen to the wind rattling your windows tonight, think of the wind in Wilkes Land. Think of the miles of solid, ancient ice pressing down on something that has a gravity all its own. We are standing on the threshold of a revelation that has been millions of years in the making. The satellites will keep mapping. The pilots will keep reporting their spinning compasses. And the ghost will keep its vigil in the dark. The silence of Antarctica is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of a held breath. It is the silence of secret that is too big to be told, but too heavy to remain hidden forever. The Wilkes Land anomaly remains the largest gravity ghost on our planet. It is a hole in our knowledge that is as wide as a mountain range. Every year, the ice shifts a little more. Every year, our instruments become a little more sensitive. And every year, the tug of the Wilkes Land ghost becomes harder to ignore. We are being pulled toward a truth that lies beneath the ice wall, a truth that has its own gravity, and a truth that is waiting for us to be brave enough to look into the depths. The ghost is mapping us as much as we are mapping it, and the encounter is inevitable. For now, the Wilkes Land ghost remains a silent titan, a massive anomaly in a land of mysteries, guarding the secrets of a world that time forgot. Imagine for a moment that the world we know is not as stable as the ground beneath your feet would suggest. Picture a time, perhaps not so long ago in the grand scale of history, when the white desert of Antarctica was not a tomb of ice, but a lush, green paradise. A land where broadleaf ferns unfurled in a warm breeze, where rivers meandered through deep valleys, and where life thrived in a climate more akin to the shores of the Mediterranean than the frozen wasteland we see today. Now, imagine that paradise ending not over millions of years, but in a single terrifying afternoon, a moment when the skies seemed to shift. The stars danced in ways they were never meant to, and a biting, unnatural cold swept across a landscape with such speed that it caught life mid-breath. This is the mystery of the flash freeze. It is a theory that challenges every timeline written in our textbooks, suggesting that the ice wall we have been exploring is not just a natural formation of slow-moving glaciers, but the remains of a sudden global cataclysm, a disaster so swift and so absolute that it turned a flourishing continent into a silent, frozen vault in a matter of hours. Tonight, we journey into the heart of this icy enigma, looking for the fingerprints of a world that was snatched away by a frost so sudden it became a monument to its own destruction. Why do we find the fossils of tropical plants buried beneath miles of solid ice? Why do the cold seams of Antarctica contain the remains of vast forests that could only have grown in a temperate climate? Official science tells U.S. of plate tectonics and the slow crawl of continents over hundreds of millions of years. They explain that Antarctica was once part of a great supercontinent called Gondwana, drifting slowly southward until it reached its current position at the bottom of the world. But there is a growing group of researchers, explorers, and independent thinkers who suggest that the evidence points to something far more violent and far more recent. They point to the work of Charles Hapgood, a professor whose theories on Earth crustal displacement were so compelling that even Albert Einstein found them worthy of a serious introduction. Hapgood suggested that the entire outer shell of the Earth can shift in a single piece, moving continents thousands of miles in a geological heartbeat. If the crust were to slide, a land that was once in the temperate zone could be thrust into the polar circle in a matter of days. The result would be a cataclysm beyond imagination. Earthquakes that would flatten mountains, tidal waves that would wash over entire continents, and a drop in temperature so sharp it would be as if a door to the void of space had been left ajar. If such a shift occurred, the ice wall of Antarctica would not be a slow accumulation of snowflakes. It would be the result of a great flash. We see hints of this in the north, with the discovery of mammoths in the Siberian permafrost. These creatures were found so perfectly preserved that their flesh was still red, and the buttercups they had been eating were still in their mouths, unwilted and undigested. For a mammoth to be frozen so quickly that the vegetation in its stomach does not rot, the temperature must have dropped to nearly 100 degrees below zero in an instant. If this happened in the north, why do we assume the south was spared? There are accounts, hidden in the restricted archives and the private journals of early polar explorers, of strange sights seen within the translucent depths of the ice wall. Sailors who navigated the Ross Sea in the 19th century spoke of seeing dark shapes frozen deep within the ice, shapes that did not resemble rocks or earth. Some described what looked like the tops of towering spires, or the perfectly straight lines of walls that seemed to be made of stone rather than ice. These were not the jagged, random patterns of nature. They were geometric, deliberate, and haunting. Could it be that the ice wall is not just guarding the land, but is itself a frozen wave? Some theories suggest that a sudden shift in the Earth's axis or a crustal displacement would cause the oceans to surge over the land. In the extreme cold of the new polar position, these massive waves would freeze before they could even recede, trapping everything beneath them in a crystal tomb. This would explain the smooth, vertical nature of the ice wall that so many early captains described. It was not built by hands, perhaps, but it was formed by a force so sudden that it preserved the landscape exactly as it was at the moment of impact. Think back to the Pyre Reese map of 1513, which we discussed earlier in our journey. If that map truly shows the subglacial coastline of Antarctica with such precision, it implies that someone was there to map it when it was free of ice. But more importantly, it implies that the ice arrived so quickly that the knowledge of the land was still fresh in the minds of those who survived. If the freeze had taken millions of years, the maps of the ancient world would have been useless long before they could be copied. The existence of such maps suggests a human memory of an ice-free South, a memory that was cut short by a sudden wall of white. As we look deeper into the stories of those who have ventured beyond the official boundaries, we find whispers of the flash frozen. There are accounts from military personnel who participated in deep core drilling projects, men who claim that the drills did not just bring up ice and rock, but fragments of wood, bits of processed metal, and even organic material that seemed to belong to a world of sun and soil. One technician, speaking years after his service, described a core sample that contained a piece of what looked like a woven fabric, preserved perfectly within a layer of ice miles below the surface. Before it could be documented, the sample was seized by officials, and the entire team was told that they had witnessed a geological anomaly that was not to be discussed. Why the secrecy? Why would the discovery of a sudden cataclysm be deemed too dangerous for the public to know? Perhaps because a sudden freeze implies cycle. If the Earth's crust has shifted before, it can shift again. If the paradise of the past was turned into a frozen prison in a single day, then our own world is far more fragile than we care to admit. The ice wall stands as a silent warning, a reminder that the stability of our environment is a gift that can be revoked without notice. But there is another, even more unsettling possibility. Some believe that the cataclysm was not entirely natural. They point to the ancient legends of many cultures, stories of a great war in the heavens or a battle between gods that ended with the destruction of a golden age. These myths often speak of fire that consumed the sky, followed by a great cold that covered the earth. In this vision, Antarctica was the center of an advanced civilization, perhaps the true Atlantis, and a flash freeze was a weapon or a consequence of a technology that went out of control. If you were to stand at the base of the ice wall today and look up at its towering white face, you might feel a sense of overwhelming silence. But for those who know what to listen for, that silence is full of echoes. It is the echo of a world that was silenced in an instant. It is the whisper of cities that might still stand, perfectly preserved, beneath miles of frozen water. It is the memory of a sun that used to shine on a land that has not felt warm for millennia. The indigenous people of the southern islands tell stories of the great white curtain that fell from the sky. They speak of ancestors who fled the south as the ground began to shake and the water turned to stone. They do not talk about a slow change of seasons. They talk about the day the world died. They describe the ice not as a natural part of the world, but as a shroud, a heavy blanket laid over a corpse. They warn that the spirits of those caught in the freeze still haunt the ice wall, their voices trapped in the wind that howls through the frozen spires. As we descend further into this mystery, the evidence of a sudden cataclysm becomes harder to ignore. We see it in the magnetic anomalies that suggest a past polar shift. We see it in the orientation of ancient monuments that no longer point to the current pole, but to a location in the Southern Ocean that was once the top of the world. We see it in the very structure of the ice wall itself, with its layers of sediment and debris that suggest a violent, watery origin rather than a slow accumulation of snow. Close your eyes and try to envision that final day in the ancient South. The people going about their lives, unaware that the stars above them were about to move. The sudden roar of the ocean as it rose to meet the sky. The terrifying drop in temperature that turned the very air into a weapon of frost. In a few hours, the green valleys were gone. The rivers were silenced. The grand buildings were encased in a crystal grip that would not let go for thousands of years. The ice wall formed as a boundary, a physical mark of the world as they knew it ended and our world of cold mystery began. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think of the ice wall not as a barrier of stone and snow, but as a snapshot in time. a moment of pure, unadulterated terror and beauty, frozen forever. The secrets it hides are not just about geography or history, but about the very nature of our planet and its hidden cycles. The flash-frozen evidence of a sudden cataclysm tells us that the past is never truly gone. It is merely waiting beneath the ice, a silent titan of memory, guarding the truth of a world that was lost in the blink of an eye. The ice is patient, and it is deep. It has held its secrets for thousands of years, and it may hold them for thousands more. But as the edges of the wall begin to crumble and the world above begins to warm, the shadows of the past are beginning to stretch. The flash-frozen world is whispering, and the ice wall is no longer the silent guardian it once was. It is a door that is beginning to creak open, revealing a history that is much stranger, much more violent, and much more fascinating than we ever dared to imagine. Sleep now, and let your dreams take you beyond the white ramparts, into the green valleys of a world that time forgot, but the ice remembered. The journey is far from over, and the secrets of the cataclysm are waiting just beneath the surface, etched in frost and shadow. For millions of years, the ice has been the ultimate guardian of secrets, a silent white tomb that has held the past in a grip so tight that time itself seemed to stop. Imagine a library where the books are made of frozen history, and the doors are locked by miles of solid crystal. For eons, this has been the reality of the Antarctic continent, a vault so cold and so deep that nothing was ever meant to escape its grasp. But the world is changing. The great white silence is beginning to speak. As the edges of the ice wall recede, and the glaciers pull back from the hidden valleys they have occupied since before the dawn of human memory, the archive is opening. We are witnessing the slow and agonizing surrender of the ice. What was once considered a permanent barrier is now becoming a window into a world we were never supposed to see. Tonight, we look at the thawing archive. We explore the artifacts, the biological anomalies, and the impossible structures that are emerging from a melt. This is not just about rising sea levels or changing climates. This is about a continent that is literally giving up its ghosts. As the ice vanishes, it leaves behind things that challenge every timeline of human history and every law of biology we have ever written. For those who watch the satellite feeds and monitor the remote sensors, the message is clear. The ice is no longer just melting. It is revealing. In the last decade, reports from the most remote research stations have taken a turn toward the surreal. Scientists who arrived to study ice cores and wind patterns are finding themselves confronted by objects that should not exist. In the newly exposed soil of the McMurdo Dry Valleys, where the ice is pulled back for first time in millennia, researchers have reportedly discovered stone tools and metallic fragments that display craftsmanship unlike any known culture. These are not the primitive scrapers of early hunter-gatherers. They are precision instruments, carved with geometric patterns so intricate they suggest a level of technology that predates the invention of the wheel. But it is not just the small things that are coming to light. Aerial surveys and high-resolution satellite imagery have captured shapes emerging from the retreating glaciers that defy geological explanation. In 2014, a drone pilot operating out of a private research facility near the Transantarctic Mountains captured footage of what appeared to be the top of a massive obsidian dome. It was smooth, perfectly symmetrical, and possessed a dark, reflective surface that stood in stark contrast to the surrounding blue ice. Within 48 hours of the discovery, the drone footage was seized by military authorities, and the area was declared a restricted zone. Official reports later claimed the dome was merely a basalt formation revealed by the melt, but the pilot, speaking through anonymous channels, insisted that nature does not produce surfaces that appear to be made of polished glass. Why is it that as the ice thaws, the level of security in Antarctica seems to increase? If these are merely natural wonders, why are they treated like national security secrets? The answers may lie in what is actually being recovered. There are whispers of recovery teams, groups of specialists who do not belong to any scientific organization, who arrive at melt sites before the civilian researchers can get their equipment in place. These teams are said to be involved in what some call dark archaeology. Their goal is not to study the past for the benefit of humanity, but to secure evidence of advanced technology before it can be documented by the public. Consider the case of Dr. Eris Thorne, a glaciologist who spent 3 seasons on the ice before his sudden and quiet removal from the program. Thorne allegedly found a series of metallic cylinders embedded in a glacier that was calving into the sea. These cylinders were not rusted or corroded. They were made of a substance that appeared to be a composite of ceramic and an unknown alloy. When he attempted to take samples, he reported that the cylinders emitted a low-frequency hum that caused his equipment to malfunction, and his team to experience intense bouts of nausea and disorientation. Within a week, his entire camp was dismantled by unmarked transport planes, and his data was erased under provisions of the Antarctic Treaty. The thawing ice is also surrendering biological mysteries. They're even more unsettling than the physical artifacts. As the glaciers melt, they are releasing microbes and viruses that have been dormant for hundreds of thousands of years. But some of these organisms do not behave like the typical prehistoric bacteria scientists expect to find. In 2016, a team studying the meltwater from a retreating ice shelf discovered biological matter that appeared to be part of a larger, complex organism. It was a network of fibrous tissue that possessed a crystalline structure. When placed under a microscope, the cells did not just move. They responded to light and sound in a way that suggested a primitive form of collective intelligence. Is it possible that the ice wall was not just a barrier to keep us out, but a containment field designed to keep something in? The more the archive thaws, the more it feels like we're opening a box that was meant to stay shut forever. Some theorists suggest that the great cataclysm that froze Antarctica occurred so suddenly that it acted as a flash freeze on an entire global civilization. This would mean that as the ice melts, we aren't just finding ruins. We are finding a world that was paused in the middle of its daily life. We are finding an archive of an era when humans, or perhaps something that came before us, walked among the stars and understood the secrets of the universe. The psychological impact on the researchers who witnessed these surrenders is profound. There are accounts of scientists who have returned from the ice with a sense of deep existential dread. They speak of the ice as something that feels alive, something that is deliberately holding on to its secrets until the very last moment. They describe the sound of the melting ice as 1,000 voices whispering at once, a cacophony of lost history that is being washed away into the ocean before it can be understood. One former researcher described it as watching a library burn. Only the books are melting into water, and the knowledge they contain is disappearing into the depths as the archive surrenders its contents. The question of ownership becomes the central conflict of the frozen South. Who owns the history that the ice surrenders? Does it belong to the nations that signed the treaty? Does it belong to the private corporations that fund the secret excavations? Or does it belong to the human race as a whole? The current reality suggests that the information is being tightly held by a small group of individuals who understand that the contents of the thawing archive could shatter our understanding of religion, science, and power. The physical changes to the ice wall are accelerating. Large sections of the shelf that have stood for millennia are collapsing, revealing deep caverns and hollow spaces that have been hidden since the last great shift of the Earth. In these caverns, explorers have reported seeing structures that look like monuments, their surfaces covered in glowing symbols that provide the only light in the frozen dark. These monuments do not look like they were built by a civilization that struggled to survive. They look like they were built by a culture that had mastered its environment, a culture that may still be waiting for the ice to finally set them free. We must ask ourselves what happens when the archive is fully open. If the melting continues at its current rate, the secrets of the ice wall will no longer be something that can be hidden by restricted zones or classified reports. The physical evidence will become too vast to ignore. We may find ourselves standing face to face with a history that makes our modern achievements look like the toys of children. We may discover that we are not the first masters of this planet, and that our ancestors or our creators have been waiting in the cold for the world to warm up again. The thawing of Antarctica is a countdown. Every drop of water that runs off the ice wall is a second ticking away on a clock that has been running for millions of years. The surrender of the ice is not an end, but a beginning. It is the start of a revelation that will force us to look into the mirror and see a version of ourselves that we have long forgotten. The archive is opening, and the secrets it surrenders will be the ultimate test of our readiness to join the cosmic community. As the ice pulls back, it leaves behind a landscape of questions that have no easy answers. Why were these things buried so deeply? Why was the world allowed to forget them? And what will we do when the last layer of ice finally disappears, leaving the archive completely exposed to the sun? The journey into the heart of the mystery is only getting colder. Even as the world grows warmer, the archive is surrendering its truth, and we are the witnesses to a history that is waking up from its long, frozen sleep. The story of Antarctica is the story of humanity's hidden origin. It is a tale of a world that existed before the ice, and a world that will exist after it. As we continue to watch the ice wall recede, we are not just watching the environment change. We are watching the return of the ancient world. The secrets are no longer hidden. They are flowing out into the light, etched in the very water that was once a prison of frost and shadow. The archive is open, and the revelation is just beginning. We have traveled through the white silence of a continent that refuses to be known. We have stood at the edge of the world where maps fail, and the ink of history begins to run like melting frost. We have looked upon the towering ramparts of ice that Captain Fabian von Bellingshausen first described as an artificial fortress, and we have listened to the echoes of Operation High Jump, where an entire naval fleet retreated from a power they could not name. Now we must pull these scattered threads together. We must step back from the individual accounts of frozen giants and glowing orbs to see the larger architecture of the Antarctic mystery. This is not merely a collection of isolated anomalies. It is a synthesis of secrets that suggest the ice wall is not just a geographical barrier, but a threshold between a reality we are allowed to perceive and a truth that has been guarded for millennia. Consider the consistency of the testimonies spanning over 200 years. From the early 19th century sealers to the modern-day scientists and high-ranking diplomats, the story remains the same. Antarctica is a place of prohibition. It is the only continent on our planet where the laws of national sovereignty are suspended in favor of an international pact of silence. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 is often presented as a triumph of environmental science. But when we look at it through the lens of history, it appears more like a global non-disclosure agreement. Why do nations that cannot agree on a single border or a single trade policy maintain such absolute unity when it comes to the southern pole? Why are there vast no-fly zones over empty stretches of ice? And why does the military presence in this pristine wilderness focus so heavily on surveillance and restriction rather than research? The answers seem to lie beyond that wall of ice. The synthesis of the Antarctic mystery reveals three distinct possibilities that converge into one unsettling reality. The first is the presence of an ancient and advanced civilization that predates every known human culture. The evidence is carved into the very geometry of the continent. We have seen the satellite images of the Antarctic pyramids, their sides so perfectly aligned and their peaks so precise that they defy the random hand of erosion. We have studied the Pyre Reefs map and the Orange Fine map, ancient charts that depict the coastline of Antarctica with incredible accuracy hundreds of years before its official discovery and without its current ice cover. This suggests that someone was mapping this land when it was still green, and that their knowledge survived through a global cataclysm that we are only beginning to understand. But who were these map makers? This leads us to the second pillar of our synthesis, the identity of the Guardians. Whether we call them in the film of ancient scripture, the frost giants of Norse myth, or the Nordic visitors of modern UFO lore, the descriptions are hauntingly similar. Witnesses speak of beings who are taller than ordinary men, with skin as pale as the ice itself and eyes that reflect a deep and ancient intelligence. These entities are not described as invaders, but as wardens. They protect the continent not from the surface dwellers, but for a purpose that transcends our understanding. Admiral Richard Byrd spoke of them in his suppressed diaries, describing a land beyond the pole where a hidden world existed in a state of advanced harmony. He warned that these guardians were concerned about humanity's destructive potential, particularly our mastery of atomic weapons. In this light, the ice wall is not just a wall. It is a boundary maintained by a superior force to keep a volatile species at a safe distance from a sanctuary they are not yet ready to enter. The third pillar of our mystery involves the modern human involvement, the secret bases like the rumored New Swabia or the classified levels beneath McMurdo Station. We must consider the possibility that our governments are not just hiding these truths from us, but are actively collaborating with the Guardians. The sudden visits of figures like John Kerry and Buzz Aldrin and Patriarch Kirill are not coincidences of travel. They are pilgrimages to a place where the rulers of our world go to acknowledge a power greater than their own. When Buzz Aldrin reportedly spoke of seeing pure evil or an ancient architecture that defied his experience as an astronaut, he was touching the edge of the synthesis. He was seeing the intersection of human history and something far older, something that has maintained its vigil beneath the ice while our civilizations rose and fell like shadows on a wall. As we synthesize these mysteries, we must also look at the phenomenon of the ice itself. We have heard the reports of infrasound, the low-frequency humming that resonates through the bones of those who venture too far into restricted zones. This is not just the sound of shifting glaciers. It is a consciousness field, a form of technological or biological resonance that protects the secrets of the wall. Scientists have documented the psychological effects of long-term Antarctic isolation, but what they often overlook is the consistency of the visions reported by those on the edge. The dreams of crystalline cities, the sense of being watched by an unseen gaze, and the sudden equipment failures that occur when researchers approach certain mathematical coordinates. This suggests that the guardianship of Antarctica is both physical and mental. The ice wall acts as a filter, allowing in those who seek simple data, but repelling those who seek the forbidden truth. What if the ice wall is actually the lid of a vast archaeological vault? If the theories of hollow earth or subglacial civilizations are correct, then Antarctica is the gateway to the most significant discovery in the history of our species. The magnetic anomalies detected near Lake Vostok and the rhythmic pulsing recorded by seismic sensors suggest that something massive and mechanical is functioning miles beneath the surface. This could be the power source of an ancient world or the life support system of a civilization that retreated underground during the last great shift of the Earth's crust. The guardians we see on the surface, the pale figures and the glowing orbs, are merely the security detail for reality that is too vast for our current society to integrate without total collapse. The synthesis of the Antarctic mystery also forces us to reevaluate our understanding of the Earth itself. If the ice wall truly encircles a world that is different from the one we see on our standard maps, then we must ask who is responsible for the deception. The blurring of satellite images and the strict regulation of polar travel are the modern tools of concealment that has lasted for centuries. We are taught that Antarctica is a barren wasteland, a desert of ice where life is a struggle. But the testimonies of those who have seen the green valleys beyond the pole and the advanced craft emerging from the sea suggest that we are living on a stage where the most important part of the scenery is hidden behind a white curtain. The final synthesis brings us back to ourselves. Why does this mystery fascinate us so deeply? Perhaps it is because we sense that our own origins are tied to the secrets of the South. If we were created or guided by the beings who now stand watch at the wall, then finding the truth about Antarctica is the key to finding the truth about our own existence. The artifacts found in the ice, the unknown metals, and the coded inscriptions are the fragments of our forgotten heritage. They are invitations to remember who we were before the ice came and who we might become if we can pass the test of the Guardians. The wall is standing there tonight, vast and silent under the light of the aurora. It is a sentinel of a history that was stolen from us and a future that is being withheld. The explorers of 1820 saw the beginning of the mystery, and the astronauts of the 20th century saw its cosmic implications. Now, in our time, the pressure is building, the ice is shifting, and the barriers are weakening. Whether through natural changes in the Earth's climate or the deliberate actions of the hidden intelligences, the time of the great revelation is approaching. The synthesis is complete. We have the historical accounts, the scientific anomalies, the religious prophecies, and the modern testimonies. They all point to the same conclusion. Antarctica is not a continent of ice. It is a continent of intention. We must look past the official denials and the blurred maps. We must listen to the whispers in the frost and the humming in the bedrock. The ice wall of Antarctica is the final frontier of human understanding. It is the place where our myths become physical and our science becomes legendary. As the world continues to focus on the distractions of the surface, the real story of our planet is being written in the frozen darkness of the South. The synthesis of the mystery shows us that we are not the masters of this world, but the guests of an older order, and that order is maintaining a vigil that is about to reach its end. The Guardians are still there, standing at the edge of the storms, their eyes reflecting the light of the sun we have not yet seen. The craft are still darting through the no-fly zones, moving with a grace that mocks our gravity. The treaties are still being signed in the shadows of the UN, and the secrets are still being whispered in the corridors of power. But the wall is no longer an absolute barrier. It has become a door. And as we stand on the threshold of the synthesized truth, we realize that the most important journey is not across the ice, but into the memory of who we truly are. The story of the ice wall is the story of humanity's awakening. It is the synthesis of everything we have forgotten and everything we are destined to discover. The silence of the South is finally breaking, and the truth that has been hidden for millennia is beginning to emerge from the ice. The archive is no longer closed, and the path beyond the wall is waiting for those who have the courage to see. This synthesis tells us that the ice wall is a guardian of a legacy that belongs to all of us. It is the vault of Atlantis, the prison of Nephilim, and the laboratory of the stars. It is the place where our technology meets its ancestors, and where our souls meet their makers. Tonight, as the wind howls across the Antarctic plateau, remember that the wall is not there to keep us out, but to hold the truth in until we are ready. The synthesis is the bridge. The mystery is the call. And the revelation is the end of the world as we know it, and the beginning of the world as it truly is. The ice is a witness to everything, and its testimony is finally being heard. Beyond the wall, the synthesis ends and the reality begins.